Secrets buried in the deepest places don't always stay underground. Sometimes they wait in the walls of your home, in the ground beneath your garden, or in the shadows cast by those you trust most. They wait for an innocent child to unearth them. Emily ran through the garden, her small feet pounding against the wet grass, her blonde hair flying behind her like a flag in the wind. Her tiny hand clutched something silver and tarnished. Behind her, a dark figure moved between the rose bushes, gaining ground with each purposeful stride. The child's eyes darted toward the mansion looming ahead, calculating the distance, knowing she wouldn't make it. Instead, she veered left toward the old stone wall, toward the place she had first felt the calling, the place where everything began, 1 week earlier. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Bennett mansion, casting long shadows across the imported marble floors. Richard Bennett stood at his office window, staring at the immaculate garden below with tired eyes. At 52, he'd built Bennett Technologies into a $7 billion empire that most men could only dream of. The company pioneered breakthroughs in neural interfaces that changed how humans interacted with machines. None of it mattered anymore. Down in the garden, his son Jason sat in his wheelchair, staring at the fountain with the same longing Richard had seen every day for 8 years. 8 long years since the boy was born. 8 years of questions without answers. Jason's small fingers gripped the wheels of his chair, pushing himself forward slightly before stopping again. The morning light caught his dark hair so much like his mother's. Elizabeth had been gone 8 years, but Richard still saw her in their son's face every day. "Mr. Bennett," Marta's soft voice broke through his thoughts. His housekeeper stood in the doorway, hands clasped before her. "I've brought your coffee." Richard turned slowly. Marta had worked for him for 7 years now, always quiet, always efficient. Her daughter Emily was 7, born just months after Marta started working here. The little blonde girl with bright green eyes who somehow wasn't afraid of his son like other children were. "Thank you, Marta." Richard took the coffee, the familiar routine doing little to ease the heaviness in his chest. "How is Jason this morning?" "The night nurse said he had another episode, sir. The muscle spasms are getting worse." Richard closed his eyes briefly. The episodes had started 3 months ago. Small tremors at first, then full body spasms that left Jason exhausted and in pain. "Dr. Mitchell is coming at noon," Marta added. "He called earlier to confirm." Dr. Thomas Mitchell, the Bennett family physician for 15 years who had been there when Jason was born. When Elizabeth died, the man who had said it was just a complication. Unexpected. Nothing anyone could have done. "I was wondering," Marta's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She twisted her hands nervously. "I was wondering if Emily could play in the garden today with Jason. She's been asking." Richard looked at his son again, sitting alone by the fountain. "The garden." His voice was rough from lack of sleep. "Marta, you know Jason can't—" "I know, sir. But Emily asked if she could push him around just for an hour." "Please." Marta's eyes were pleading. "Jason hasn't smiled in weeks, not since Dr. Mitchell said there was nothing more he could do." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Dr. Mitchell, the 15th specialist they'd consulted the 15th time, hearing, "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but we just don't understand why your son can't walk. There's no medical reason. His spine is perfect. His nerves are intact. It's as if something just stopped working before he was born." Before he was born, when Elizabeth was still alive. Richard closed his eyes, seeing his wife's face. Beautiful Elizabeth, who died bringing Jason into this world. The doctor said it was sudden, unexpected, a complication they couldn't explain, just like they couldn't explain why their son would never walk. "All right," Richard heard himself say. 1 hour. Marta's face brightened. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." 20 minutes later, Richard watched from his window as Emily ran into the garden, her blonde hair bouncing in the sunlight. She went straight to Jason, kneeling beside his wheelchair without hesitation. "Hey, Jason." Her young voice carried up to the window. "Guess what Mom said? We can explore the whole garden today. Even the old part by the back wall that nobody goes to anymore." Jason's face transformed. A smile, a real smile, spread across his features. "Really? But that part is all muddy and gross." So what will get muddy? Come on. Emily grabbed the wheelchair handles and started pushing, both children laughing. Richard felt something crack in his chest. When was the last time he'd heard his son laugh? He was about to turn away when something caught his eye. In the far corner of the garden, where the old stone wall stood covered in ivy, Emily had stopped the wheelchair. She was pointing at something on the ground, her small face suddenly serious. Richard leaned closer to the window, squinting. What was she looking at? Emily knelt down in the mud, digging at something with her hands. Jason leaned forward in his chair, watching intently. Then Emily pulled something from the earth, something small and dark that glinted in the sunlight. Even from this distance, Richard could see the girl's expression change. She looked up at Jason, then back at the object in her muddy hands. Whatever Emily had found in that mud, whatever she was holding in her small hands, Richard could feel it in his bones, the same way he'd felt it the night Elizabeth died. Something terrible was buried in that garden, and a 7-year-old girl had just dug it up. Richard moved before his mind caught up. He was running, actually running through the mansion halls, down the grand staircase and out into the garden. His heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the old stone wall. Emily looked up at him with those enormous green eyes. Mud streaked across her cheeks. In her small, dirty hands she held a locket, silver tarnished black with age and earth, but unmistakably expensive, the kind of jewelry Elizabeth used to wear. "Mr. Bennett," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Jason says this belonged to his mama." Richard's knees nearly gave out. He knelt beside the wheelchair, taking the locket from Emily's hands with shaking fingers. He knew this piece intimately. He'd given it to Elizabeth on their wedding day. She wore it every single day after that. "They told me she was wearing it when she died." Richard's voice cracked. "They said they buried her with it." "Dad," Jason's voice was small, frightened. "Why would Mom's necklace be buried in our garden?" Richard couldn't answer. His thumb found the tiny clasp and the locket sprang open. Inside, just as he remembered, were 2 photographs. One of him, one of Elizabeth, her blonde hair shining in the sun, her smile radiant. But there was something else. A tiny piece of paper folded so small it was almost invisible, tucked behind Elizabeth's photo. Emily leaned closer, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What is it?" she asked. Richard's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was Elizabeth's. He'd recognize it anywhere. The message was brief but shattering. "Richard, if you find this, I'm already gone. Save our son. The rose garden." The world tilted beneath him. Richard looked up at the mansion, at the windows where he'd stood so many times, at the walls that had been his home for over a decade. Suddenly it all felt sinister, dark, wrong. "Emily," he managed to say, his voice barely audible. "Where exactly did you find this?" The little girl pointed to the hole she'd dug, then traced a line with her finger along the wall. "There's more stuff buried here, Mr. Bennett. I felt something hard when I was digging, like a box or something." Richard's blood ran cold. Dr. Mitchell would be arriving in less than an hour. "Marta," he called out, his voice sharp with sudden urgency. "Marta, get out here now." The housekeeper came running, her face pale with worry. "Sir, what's wrong?" "Take Jason inside now, and Emily." He looked at the little girl, this brave, curious child who had just unearthed something terrible. "Emily, you need to go with your mother right now." "But Mr. Bennett," Emily started. "Please." Richard's eyes were wild. "Both of you, go to Marta's quarters and lock the door. Don't come out until I come get you." Marta saw the locket in his hands, saw his expression, and understood something was very wrong. She grabbed Emily's hand and started pushing Jason's wheelchair toward the house, moving fast. Richard turned back to the wall, to the hole in the mud. His wife's locket had been buried here, hidden with a note warning him about their son. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his bare hands, mud caking under his fingernails. His expensive suit was ruined. He didn't care. His fingers hit something solid, wood rotted and soft with age. A box, just as Emily said. With a strength born of desperation, Richard pulled it free from the earth. It was small, the size of a shoebox, falling apart in his hands. He pried open the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in Elizabeth's handwriting, all addressed to him, letters he had never received. Richard's vision blurred with tears as he grabbed the first one, dated 8 years ago, 1 month before Jason was born. "Richard, my darling," it began. "If you're reading this, then something terrible has happened." Richard sat on the muddy ground, letters scattered around him like fallen leaves. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the pages, but he forced himself to read, forced himself to understand. The first letter was dated October 15th, 8 years ago. Elizabeth had been 8 months pregnant. "Richard, my darling, if you're reading this, then something terrible has happened. I'm writing this in secret, hiding it away because I don't know who to trust anymore. Not even the staff. Especially not her. 3 days ago I found something in Dr. Mitchell's bag when he came for my checkup. Pills. Not the vitamins he said he was giving me. I looked them up, Richard. They're muscle relaxants. Strong ones. Tubocurin and baclofen, the kind that can cross the placental barrier." I confronted him and he smiled, actually smiled. He said I was paranoid that pregnancy hormones were making me imagine things. But I'm not imagining this. I feel weak all the time now. The baby barely moves anymore. Something is wrong and Dr. Mitchell knows what it is. I tried calling you at the office 12 times yesterday. Vanessa said you were in meetings, but Richard, I know your schedule. You didn't have meetings. Where are you? I'm scared. I'm writing these letters and hiding them because I think someone is intercepting our communication. I think someone is trying to... The letter ended abruptly, as if she'd been interrupted. Richard's chest heaved with sobs. Dr. Mitchell, their family physician for 15 years. The man who delivered Jason. The man who'd been there when Elizabeth died. The man who'd said it was just an unfortunate complication. Unexpected. Nothing anyone could have done. With trembling hands, Richard reached for the next letter dated 5 days later. "Richard, I'm writing this quickly. She was here again today. Your secretary, Vanessa. She came to the house, said she needed you to sign some papers, but you weren't here. You're never here anymore. She stayed for tea, insisted on it, and after she left, I felt sick. So sick. The room was spinning. I barely made it upstairs before I collapsed. Richard, I think she's poisoning me. I think she's been poisoning me for months, and Dr. Mitchell is helping her. Please, if you find these letters, please believe me. I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. Our baby, something is wrong with our baby, and they did this. But why? Why would they do this? I heard them talking once when they thought I was asleep. Vanessa said something about once the baby is born and she's gone. Gone where, Richard? What are they planning? I've hidden my wedding locket with these letters. If something happens to me, please find it. Please find the truth. And please, my love, protect our son. Richard couldn't breathe. Vanessa, his secretary for 15 years. Efficient professional Vanessa, who'd been with him since the early days of Bennett Technologies. Always there when he needed her. She'd helped him through Elizabeth's death, managed everything when he couldn't function. She'd been at the funeral, tears streaming down her face. She'd been lying the entire time. Another letter dated the day before Jason was born. This will be my last letter. I can feel it. The baby isn't moving at all now. Dr. Mitchell says we need to induce labor tomorrow. Vanessa will be there. She insisted on being present to support you. She told you. But you don't see it, do you? You don't see the way she looks at you, the way she's looked at you for years. I finally understand now. She's in love with you, Richard. She's been in love with you since before we met. And she can't stand that I exist, that our baby exists. Whatever she and Dr. Mitchell gave me, it damaged our son. I can feel it. And now they're going to finish what they started. If I don't survive tomorrow, and I don't think I will, please know that I love you. I've always loved you. And please, please save our boy. Don't let them win. Don't let them take you from Jason. The truth is buried here under the old wall where we planted our first rosebush together. Remember, you said this spot would always be ours. Find the truth, my love, and make them pay. Forever yours, Elizabeth. Richard's scream tore through the garden, raw and primal. Birds scattered from the trees at the sound. The locket fell from his hands into the mud. Vanessa, Dr. Mitchell, they'd killed his wife. They'd crippled his son before he was even born. And for 8 years, Richard had trusted them both. His phone rang the screen showing Vanessa's name. Richard stared at it, rage and grief warring within him. With a trembling finger, he answered. Richard, Vanessa's voice was professional concerned. Dr. Mitchell called. He's running about 45 minutes late for Jason's appointment. He'll be there around 1 o'clock. Is that all right? 45 minutes. She was giving him a deadline without knowing it. That's fine. Richard forced himself to sound normal. Thank you, Vanessa. Is everything okay? You sound strange. Just tired, he lied. Jason had a rough night. I'm sorry to hear that. I know how much you worry about him. Her voice softened the concern in it, now sounding hideously false to his ears. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Actually, Richard said, an idea forming. Could you come by the house? There are some papers I need to sign before my trip next week. A pause. Of course. I can be there in an hour. Perfect. I'll see you then. Richard hung up and immediately made another call, this one to an old friend from his college days. Michael Harris had once been Richard's roommate before going into law enforcement. Now he was a detective with the Boston Police Department. They hadn't spoken in years, but Harris owed him. Big time. Harris, the gruff voice answered. Mike, it's Richard Bennett. A pause. Rich, Jesus, it's been what, 5 years? 7. Listen, I need your help. It's an emergency. Something in Richard's voice must have conveyed the gravity of the situation. Harris's tone changed immediately. What's going on? My wife didn't die from childbirth complications 8 years ago. She was murdered. And my son's paralysis, it was deliberately caused. I have proof. Letters she wrote before she died warning me about my secretary and my family doctor. Slow down, Rich. That's a serious accusation. Who are we talking about? My secretary Vanessa Palmer and Dr. Thomas Mitchell. They've been poisoning my son for 8 years, keeping him paralyzed, and they're coming to my house within the hour. Are you safe? Is your son safe? For now. But I need you here, Mike. I need you to bring a team. This is big. I'm on my way. 40 minutes. Keep your son with you at all times. Don't eat or drink anything. Don't let anyone in until I get there. Richard burst through the mansion doors, mud-covered and wild-eyed. The letters were clutched against his chest, protected in a plastic bag he'd grabbed from the garden shed. Evidence. James, he called to his butler, who nearly jumped out of his skin at the sight of his employer in such a state. Sir, are you all right? You're covered in... I need you to listen very carefully. Richard cut him off. Dr. Mitchell and Vanessa are coming here within the hour. When they arrive, tell them I'm in my study, but under no circumstances are they to go anywhere near Jason. Understand? James blinked, clearly confused. Yes, sir, but what's... I can't explain right now, just do as I say. And James? No one enters this house without my knowledge. No one. Richard took the stairs 3 at a time, running toward Marta's quarters. He pounded on the door. Marta, open up. It's me. The door cracked open, Marta's frightened face appearing in the gap. Mr. Bennett, what's happening? You're scaring us. Is Jason okay? Has he eaten anything today? Drunk anything? Marta's eyes widened. Just breakfast. Toast and orange juice. I made it myself. Why? What's going on? Richard pushed past her into the small suite. Jason was on the couch, Emily sitting beside him. Both children were pale and silent. They'd heard him screaming in the garden. He knelt in front of his son, taking the boy's face in his muddy hands. Jason, listen to me very carefully. Has Dr. Mitchell or Miss Vanessa given you anything to eat or drink lately? Any medicine? Anything at all? Jason's eyes grew wide. Dr. Mitchell gave me new vitamins yesterday. He said they'd help me get stronger, make my legs work better. The room tilted. Richard felt Marta's hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Where are they? He demanded. Where are the vitamins? Jason pointed to his bedroom. On my nightstand, the bottle with the blue label. Richard was already running. He found the bottle small and amber-colored, labeled with Jason's name and Dr. Mitchell's signature on the prescription. He unscrewed the cap and poured one pill into his palm. It looked normal, just a regular vitamin. But he knew better now. He grabbed his phone again, dialed Harris. I need you to bring a forensic team. I have the pills they've been using. And Harris, hurry. They'll be here soon. Richard went to his study, sat down at his desk, and pulled out the top drawer. Inside was a gun he'd bought years ago for protection when Bennett Technologies started becoming successful. He'd never fired it outside a shooting range. He checked the chamber. Loaded. At precisely 12:55 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the study window, Richard could see Dr. Mitchell's silver Mercedes in the driveway. He watched as James opened the door, heard the familiar pleasantries exchanged. Then footsteps approached his study, the measured tread of expensive orthopedic shoes. Dr. Mitchell knocked softly, then opened the door without waiting for a response. He'd always done that, a small liberty Richard had permitted the family doctor. "Richard, good afternoon. I understand Jason had a difficult night. Let's discuss increasing his—" Mitchell stopped mid-sentence, the professional smile vanishing from his face. Richard was pointing the gun directly at his chest. "Sit down, Tom," Richard said quietly. "We need to talk about Elizabeth." Mitchell's face went deathly pale, but he didn't move toward the chair. Instead, his eyes darted to the door, calculating escape routes. "I wouldn't," Richard said, his voice deadly calm. "James has locked all the exits, and the police are already on their way." "Richard, what on earth are you—" "Sit down." Something in Richard's tone made the doctor obey. He sank into the leather chair across from the desk, his hands gripping the armrests. Richard reached into his desk drawer with his free hand and pulled out the plastic bag containing Elizabeth's letters. He tossed it across the desk. It landed in front of Mitchell with a soft thud. "Read them," he commanded, out loud. Dr. Mitchell stared at the letters, recognition dawning on his face. His professional mask cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. Fear. Pure, naked fear. "Where did you find these?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Where Elizabeth said they would be. Under the rose bush by the old stone wall." Richard's finger tightened on the trigger. "Now read them. Start with the first one." Mitchell's hands were shaking as he pulled out the first letter. He began to read, his voice trembling over Elizabeth's words, accusing him of poisoning her with muscle relaxants. "Enough!" Richard cut him off midway through the second letter. "Now tell me why. Tell me why you poisoned my wife. Tell me why you damaged my son. Tell me why I shouldn't end your life right now." Mitchell slumped in the chair, defeated. "It was Vanessa. It was all Vanessa's idea." "Keep talking." 15 years ago, when you first hired her, she came to me for a routine physical. We started talking about you. She was obsessed with you even then. Over the years, it got worse. When you met Elizabeth, Vanessa was devastated." Richard's jaw clenched. "So you killed my wife because my secretary had a crush on me? You don't understand." Mitchell's voice cracked. "Vanessa discovered I had a problem, a gambling problem. I owed people money, dangerous people. She paid my debts, over $200,000. In exchange, she wanted my help. Your help murdering my wife and crippling my child." The gun wavered in Richard's hand. "It wasn't supposed to be murder, just the baby. Vanessa said if the child was born with problems, Elizabeth wouldn't be able to handle it. She'd leave you. Vanessa would be there to pick up the pieces." "But Elizabeth found out." Mitchell nodded miserably. "She was smarter than we expected. She found the tuberculosis in my bag, started taking activated charcoal to bind the toxins, tried to protect the baby. And when that didn't work, you killed her." "No." Mitchell's eyes widened. "That wasn't the plan. But during the delivery, there were complications, real ones. Elizabeth started hemorrhaging, and then she looked at me. She knew Richard. She looked right at me and said, 'Tell him. Tell Richard what you did to our son.' She was going to expose us." Richard's blood roared in his ears. "So you gave her an overdose of something?" A single tear rolled down Mitchell's cheek. "Morphine. It was quick. She didn't suffer." "She didn't—" Richard couldn't finish the sentence, rage choking his words. "And you've been poisoning my son for 8 years, keeping him paralyzed when there was nothing wrong with him." Mitchell nodded again. "Low doses of the same drugs, just enough to maintain the paralysis without causing other damage. Vanessa insisted. She said it was the only way to keep you dependent on her, to keep you from starting another family." The doorbell rang, the sound cutting through the tension in the room. Richard heard James's measured stride across the foyer, the murmur of voices, then the sound of heavy boots. Harris had arrived. The study door burst open. Detective Harris rushed in, 3 officers behind him, guns drawn. "Richard, step back. Drop the weapon." Richard carefully placed the gun on the desk, never taking his eyes off Mitchell. "His name is Dr. Thomas Mitchell. He just confessed to murdering my wife 8 years ago and poisoning my son ever since. You'll find evidence in that bag on the desk and a bottle of contaminated vitamins in Jason's bedroom." As officers surrounded Mitchell, reading him his rights, while the doctor wept quietly, Richard walked to the window. In the garden, he could see the hole by the stone wall, the place where truth had been buried for so long. The doorbell rang again. James appeared at the study door. "Sir, Miss Palmer is here. She says you're expecting her." Richard turned from the window, his face set in grim determination. "Show her in, James. And Harris, you'll want to hear this. She was the mastermind behind all of it." Vanessa entered the room, her professional smile freezing on her face as she took in the scene: police officers, Mitchell in handcuffs, Richard standing behind his desk with a look she'd never seen before. "Richard, what's happening? Are you all right?" Her concern sounded genuine. That was the most terrifying part. "Vanessa," Richard's voice was ice. "We need to talk about Elizabeth." Her face betrayed nothing but her eyes. Her eyes darted to Mitchell, then to the plastic bag on the desk, and Richard saw the moment she understood. The mask slipped just for a second, revealing something dark and terrible beneath. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said carefully. "Who are these people? Why is Tom in handcuffs?" "You're 15 years too late for that act, Vanessa." Richard nodded to Harris, who stepped forward with his badge. "Vanessa Palmer, I'm Detective Michael Harris, Boston PD. We need to ask you some questions about Elizabeth Bennett's death and the ongoing poisoning of Jason Bennett." Vanessa's composure finally crumbled. She looked at Richard, and for the first time in 15 years he saw her true face, raw with decades of obsession, rage, and thwarted desire. "Everything I did for us," she whispered. Richard felt cold all over. "There was never an us, Vanessa. There never could have been." "You would have seen eventually," she insisted, her voice rising. "If she hadn't gotten pregnant, if she'd just gone away like she was supposed to, you would have turned to me. I was there for you every day for 15 years. I built your company with you. I made you successful. You killed my wife." Richard's voice broke. "You poisoned my son. You stole 8 years of his life." "I gave you everything!" Vanessa screamed, lunging forward. Harris caught her, restraining her as she fought wildly. "Everything! And you never even saw me! Never once!" As officers dragged Vanessa from the room, still screaming about all she had sacrificed for him, Richard collapsed into his chair, the weight of 8 years of lies finally crushing him. Mitchell's confession, Vanessa's madness, Elizabeth's desperate final warning, it was too much. A small hand touched his arm. He looked up to find Emily standing beside him, her green eyes serious beyond her years. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, "Jason is asking for you. He's scared." Richard wiped his eyes. "Thank you, Emily. I'll go to him now." As he stood, Emily tugged his sleeve again. "She tried to protect him, you know. Jason's mama. That's why she hid those letters where only the right person would find them." Richard looked down at the little girl, puzzled. "What do you mean, Emily?" Emily smiled sadly. "Some secrets need special people to find them. That's what my daddy used to say before he hurt me and Mama ran away. He said I was special, that I could see things other people couldn't." A chill ran down Richard's spine. "You knew the locket was there. You felt it somehow." Emily nodded. "I always know when something important is hiding. And Mr. Bennett, there's more. We didn't find everything yet." "What else is there, Emily?" "I don't know exactly. But Jason's mama left more than just letters. She left a way to help him. I can feel it." Richard knelt to the child's level, looking into those uncanny green eyes. "Will you help me find it, Emily? Will you help me save my son?" Emily nodded solemnly. "That's why I'm here. That's why Mama brought us to your house. Jason's mama arranged it all before she died. She knew we would come. She knew I would find the truth." As Richard walked upstairs to comfort his son, Emily's words echoed in his mind. Elizabeth had somehow known, She had fought to protect their son until her last breath. And now, 8 years later, her plan was finally unfolding. The battle was just beginning. Vanessa might be arrested, but Richard knew powerful people like her had ways of fighting back. And there was still the mystery of Emily, this strange, perceptive child who had appeared in their lives at precisely the right moment. Most importantly, there was Jason. His son had been poisoned for 8 years. What would it take to undo that damage? Was it even possible? Richard reached Jason's room, pushing open the door to find his son sitting on the bed, pale and frightened. When the boy saw his father, he burst into tears. "Dad, everyone's yelling and there are police and Dr. Mitchell was taken away in handcuffs." Richard sat beside his son, pulling him close. "I know, buddy. I'm so sorry you had to see that. But things are going to be different now. Better." "What's happening, Dad?" Richard took a deep breath. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother was murdered and he had been deliberately poisoned his entire life?" "We found out why your legs don't work," he said finally. "And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. Someone has been making you sick on purpose, but we caught them and now we're going to make you better." Jason looked up at him with Elizabeth's eyes. "You mean I might walk someday?" "Yes," Richard said, hope blooming in his chest for the first time in 8 years. "You might walk. We're going to do everything we can to make that happen." "Was it Dr. Mitchell and Miss Vanessa? Were they the ones making me sick?" Richard was taken aback by his son's perception. "How did you know?" Jason looked down. "I heard Dr. Mitchell on the phone once. He said, 'The boy will never walk. I've made sure of it.' I thought he was talking about another boy. I never thought he meant me." Richard's heart broke all over again. "I'm so sorry, Jason. I should have protected you better." "It's okay, Dad. You didn't know." Jason's forgiveness was more than Richard deserved. Did they hurt Mom too?" Richard closed his eyes, briefly wondering how much truth his son could bear. "Yes," he said finally. "They did." Jason was quiet for a long moment. "Then we have to make them pay. For Mom." Richard looked at his son with new eyes. In that moment, Jason wasn't a helpless, paralyzed child. He was Elizabeth's son, with her determination and courage shining through. "We will," Richard promised. "We absolutely will." A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Harris stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "Rich, we need to talk. Mitchell's cooperating, telling us everything. But Vanessa, she's saying some disturbing things about Emily." Richard tensed. "What about Emily?" Harris glanced over his shoulder to make sure they were alone. "She claims Emily isn't a normal child. Says her father is some scientist named James Carter who performed illegal genetic experiments on her as an embryo. Says that's why the girl found the locket. She has enhanced spatial awareness, some kind of sixth sense." Richard remembered Emily's words. Some secrets need special people to find them. "Is Carter a threat?" Richard asked. "Unknown. But Vanessa says he's been looking for the girl and her mother for years. And now that this story is going to break..." Harris left the implication hanging. Richard stood up, his protective instincts flaring. Not just for Jason now, but for Emily and Marta too. "Put security on the house, round the clock. And Harris, find everything you can on James Carter. If he's coming for Emily, we need to be ready." Harris nodded. "Already on it. And Rich, there's something else. Mitchell mentioned a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 22847. Says it contains detailed records of everything they did to Elizabeth and Jason. The drugs, the dosages, everything." Richard's mind raced. Those records could be the key to helping Jason. "We'll get them first thing tomorrow. And Harris, thank you for believing me, for coming so quickly." Harris clapped his old friend on the shoulder. "That's what friends do. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As Harris left, Richard looked down at his son. "You should rest too, buddy. It's been a crazy day." Jason's eyes were already drooping. "Will Emily come back tomorrow?" "She makes me laugh." Richard smiled. "Yes, she'll be back. She's going to help us find something very important, something your mom left for us." As Jason drifted off to sleep, Richard stood at the window looking out at the garden where Emily had unearthed the first piece of the puzzle. Somewhere out there were more answers. The key to helping Jason walk again. And possibly a dangerous man named James Carter who would stop at nothing to reclaim his experimental child. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. For Jason's future. For Emily's safety. For justice for Elizabeth. For the first time in 8 years, Richard Bennett had a purpose beyond his grief. And he would not fail again. Morning light filtered through the reinforced security windows of the Bennett mansion. The property had transformed overnight. 4 private security guards patrolled the perimeter. Police cars came and went. Inside, the atmosphere hung heavy with revelation and uncertainty. Richard Bennett stood in his kitchen watching as Emily helped Jason with his breakfast. The 2 children had formed a bond that seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. There was something beautiful about it, something that made his chest ache with memories of Elizabeth. "They're good for each other," Marta said quietly, appearing beside him with coffee. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. They had spoken late into the night about Emily, about James Carter, about the danger that might be coming their way. "You should have told me about Carter," Richard said, not accusingly but with concern. "About Emily being different." Marta's hands tightened around her own coffee cup. "Would you have believed me? That my ex-husband was a neuroscientist who experimented on our unborn daughter? That she can sense things hidden from others?" Richard glanced at Emily, who was carefully cutting Jason's pancakes into perfect triangles. "After what she found in the garden? Yes, I would have believed you." "Your wife knew," Marta said softly. "Elizabeth. That's why she helped us hide. Why she gave us new identities, arranged this job for me. She protected us." Richard's heart stuttered. Elizabeth knew about Emily, about Carter. They met at a neuroscience conference. Carter was presenting research. Bennett Technologies was considering funding. Elizabeth recognized the ethical violations in his work and reported him. When I fled with Emily, she was the only one who helped us. The revelation struck Richard like a physical blow. Elizabeth had known so much more than he ever realized. While he had been building his company, she had been fighting battles he never knew existed. Detective Harris arrived at 9, his weathered face grave as he entered the kitchen. He nodded at the children, then gestured for Richard to follow him into the study. "We've been to the bank," Harris said without preamble, placing a thick folder on the desk. "Mitchell wasn't lying about the records. It's all here. Detailed logs of every drug they gave Elizabeth, every dose administered to Jason over the past 8 years. Even projections of how the paralysis would progress." Richard took the folder with trembling hands. "Can this help him? Can it be reversed?" Harris's expression softened slightly. "I've already sent copies to 3 top neurologists. They're reviewing it now. And Vanessa Mitchell. Mitchell's cooperating fully, hoping for leniency. As for Vanessa, that's the problem. Her lawyer got her released on bail this morning." Richard froze. "She's out, after what she did. She's wealthy, no prior record, and her lawyer argued she's not a flight risk." Harris looked genuinely apologetic. "There's more. She's claiming Emily is Carter's intellectual property, that the girl is part of an experimental program that Carter has legal rights to." Rage surged through Richard's veins. "A child is not property. I know that, but Carter has connections. He's already filed emergency petitions claiming parental rights were never legally terminated." Richard paced the room, mind racing. "He'll never get near Emily. I'll use every resource, every connection I have." Harris nodded. "I figured you'd say that, which is why I've arranged protection details for both children, and why I've brought this." He handed Richard a business card. "Dr. Olivia Chen, Director of Neurology at Boston Children's Hospital, the best there is. She's reviewed Mitchell's records and wants to see Jason today. Says there might be a chance." Hope, dangerous, fragile hope, flared in Richard's chest. A chance for what? A chance he might walk again. 2 hours later, Richard sat in Dr. Chen's office at Boston Children's Hospital, trying to absorb everything she was telling him. Jason was downstairs undergoing tests. Emily had insisted on staying with him, holding his hand through the frightening procedures. Dr. Chen was in her 50s, with short gray hair and penetrating eyes that missed nothing. She pulled up images on her computer screen, brain scans, nerve conduction studies, muscle biopsies. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to understand something before we discuss treatment options. She began, her voice gentle but direct. Your son's condition is unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of practice. Richard braced himself for the worst. The drugs Jason was given, primarily tubocurarine derivatives and modified baclofen, didn't damage his spine or muscles. They damaged the neural pathways between his brain and his lower extremities. The signals simply never learned to form correctly during his development. Can you fix it? Richard's voice was raw. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Normally, no. After 8 years, the window for neural development is essentially closed. Most children in this situation would remain paralyzed for life. Richard's heart sank, the brief flare of hope extinguishing. However, Dr. Chen continued, her expression brightening slightly. Jason is extraordinary. We've been running tests on his cognitive function, his brain activity, his response to stimuli. His brain is completely healthy, more than healthy. It's brilliant. He's been compensating for his physical limitations by developing other neural pathways at an advanced rate. I don't understand. How does that help him walk? Dr. Chen pulled up another image. There's a new treatment, experimental. It combines intense physical therapy with electrical neural stimulation and a specialized drug regimen that encourages neural pathway development. We've had success with younger children, but never with anyone Jason's age. But you think it might work for him? I think Jason's brain is plastic enough that it might work. But Mr. Bennett, I need you to understand what this means. The treatment would take months, possibly years. It would be painful, exhausting. There's no guarantee of success. And even if it works, he may never walk normally. What are the odds? Give me a number. Dr. Chen met his eyes directly. 15%. Maybe 20 if we're lucky. 15%. 1 in 6 or 7. Terrible odds, but better than 0. Let's do it, Richard said firmly. 20% is better than nothing. Dr. Chen nodded. I'll begin preparing the treatment protocol immediately. But there's one more thing, Mr. Bennett. When I was examining Jason, I asked him what he wanted most in the world. Do you know what he said? Richard shook his head. He said he wanted to walk Emily to school one day. Just once. He said she deserves to have a friend who can keep up with her. Richard's chest tightened with emotion. Whatever this treatment costs, I know its experimental insurance won't cover it. Just tell me the number. We're looking at approximately $2 million for the first year alone. I don't care if it costs $20 million. Do whatever it takes to help my son walk. As Richard left Dr. Chen's office, his phone rang. An unknown number. Bennett, he answered tersely. Mr. Bennett. The voice was smooth, cultured, with a slight European accent. My name is James Carter. I believe you have my daughter. Richard stopped walking, blood turning to ice in his veins. Emily is Marta's daughter. You lost any claim to her when you used her as a test subject. A soft chuckle. Is that what Marta told you, that I experimented on our daughter? How dramatic. I simply gave Emily advantages other children don't have. Enhanced spatial cognition, heightened intuition, the ability to perceive patterns invisible to normal humans. You altered her genes without consent. That's a crime. A matter of perspective. The courts may see it differently. But I'm not calling to argue legalities. I have a proposal for you. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. I'm listening. I understand your son's condition. I've reviewed Dr. Mitchell's records. Yes, I have my sources. I also understand Dr. Chen has offered an experimental treatment with a 15% chance of success. How could you possibly know that? I know everything about neural pathway development, Mr. Bennett. It was my life's work before your wife destroyed my career. I can offer your son a treatment with a 60% chance of success. In exchange, I want supervised visits with Emily. Nothing more. The offer dangled before Richard like forbidden fruit. A 60% chance for Jason, quadruple what Dr. Chen offered. Why should I believe you? Because unlike Mitchell and your secretary, I have no reason to harm your son. Because I genuinely want what's best for Emily. And because deep down you know I'm the only one who truly understands her condition. I need time to think about this. Of course. Call me when you've decided, but Mr. Bennett, don't wait too long. Neural pathways become more resistant to change with each passing day. The line went dead. Richard stood frozen in the hospital hallway, the impossible choice weighing on him. Trust the man who had experimented on his own child, or reject what might be Jason's best chance to walk. He found Jason and Emily in the pediatric ward. Emily was reading to Jason from a book of fairy tales, her small voice animated as she acted out different characters. Jason was smiling more relaxed than Richard had seen him in months. "Dad," Jason's face lit up. "Emily knows all the stories by heart. She doesn't even need to look at the pages." Emily blushed. "I just remember things. That's all." Richard studied the little girl, seeing her in a new light. What else had Carter enhanced? What other abilities lay dormant within her? "Jason, Dr. Chen says she might be able to help you. There's a new treatment that could teach your legs to work again." Jason's eyes widened. "Really, I could walk?" "It's not guaranteed. The chance is pretty small and it would hurt a lot. But yes, it's possible." Jason's expression turned serious, so adult-like it made Richard's heart ache. "How much would it hurt?" "A lot, buddy. Every day for months." Jason nodded solemnly. "I want to try. I want to stand up and hug you without you having to bend down." Emily took Jason's hand. "I'll help you. I'll be there every day." Richard felt a surge of protectiveness for both children, his son and this strange, gifted little girl who had walked into their lives and changed everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Harris. "Vanessa made bail. Carter filed for emergency hearing. Tomorrow 9 a.m. family court. We need to talk." The storm was gathering. Decisions would have to be made. That evening, after the children were asleep, Richard sat in his study with Harris and their lawyer, Patricia Morgan. The situation was even more complex than he'd feared. "Carter has powerful friends," Patricia explained. "He's claiming his research was legal under certain classified government protocols, that Emily is technically a research subject in an ongoing study with national security implications." Harris shook his head in disgust. "Using a child as a national security asset. It's obscene." "It gets worse," Patricia continued. "Vanessa is supporting his claim. She's provided affidavits stating that Elizabeth Bennett interfered with classified research when she helped Marta and Emily disappear. They're painting Elizabeth as the criminal here." Richard's hands clenched into fists. "They're trying to destroy her reputation. Even in death, they won't leave her alone." "There's something else," Harris said quietly. "The DA is concerned about the case against Vanessa. Mitchell's testimony is problematic. He admits to administering the drugs but claims Vanessa never explicitly ordered Elizabeth's death. She as good as killed her." "I know that." Harris sighed. "But proving murder will be difficult. The most we might get is conspiracy and assault charges." Richard stood abruptly, pacing the room. "So Vanessa might walk free after everything she did?" "Not if we can find more evidence," Harris said. "Mitchell mentioned that Vanessa kept records of her own, a sort of trophy collection of her plan. Where, he doesn't know. But it would contain proof of premeditation if we could find it." Richard stopped pacing, an idea forming. "Emily found the locket. Maybe she could find these records too." Harris looked troubled. "You want to use a 7-year-old girl to locate evidence, Rich? I don't think—" "Not use her. Ask for her help. There's a difference." Richard's voice softened. "You haven't seen what she can do. The way she found that locket wasn't random. She sensed it somehow." Patricia cleared her throat. "Even if Emily could help, we need to focus on tomorrow's hearing. Carter will be there with an army of lawyers. He'll try to take temporary custody while the courts sort out his claims." "Over my dead body," Richard growled. "There is another option," Patricia said carefully. "You could petition for temporary guardianship of Emily yourself. As Jason's father, you could argue that separating them would be traumatic for both children, especially with Jason beginning medical treatment." Richard hadn't considered this possibility. "Would that work?" "It might buy us time. The courts move slowly in custody cases, especially complicated ones. If you were Emily's temporary guardian, it would keep her safe while we fight Carter's claims." As the legal team departed, Richard found Marta waiting in the hallway, her face pale with fear. "You heard?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Carter will never stop. He sees Emily as his greatest achievement, not as a person, not as our daughter. We'll protect her, Marta. I promise you that. The way Elizabeth protected us." Tears spilled down Marta's cheeks. She died trying to save her son from monsters. I don't want that to happen to you too. Richard took her hands in his. It won't. This time we're fighting back. All of us together. Upstairs, Richard checked on Jason one last time before bed. His son was awake, staring at the ceiling. Can't sleep. Richard sat on the edge of the bed. I keep thinking about walking, what it would feel like. Jason's voice was wistful. Do you think it will hurt a lot? The treatment. Richard couldn't lie. Yes, it will probably be the hardest thing you've ever done. Jason was quiet for a moment. Dad, I got a phone call today, when Emily was in the bathroom. Richard tensed. From who? A man. He said he was a doctor who could help me walk better than Dr. Chen. He said all you had to do was let him see Emily sometimes. Carter. He had somehow reached Jason directly. Rage boiled in Richard's veins. What did you tell him? Jason's eyes were clear and determined. I told him no. I said Emily is my friend, not something to trade. And I said my dad would never make a deal with someone who hurts children. Pride surged through Richard's chest. You said exactly the right thing. He got really mad. Said I'd never walk if I was stupid like my mother. Richard pulled Jason into a fierce hug. Your mother was the smartest, bravest person I've ever known, and so are you. After Jason finally fell asleep, Richard found himself drawn to Elizabeth's study, a room he had preserved exactly as she left it 8 years ago. He rarely entered it. The pain was usually too great. But tonight he needed to feel close to her. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, impossibly preserved after all these years. Her books lined the shelves, her paintings hung on the walls. Richard sat at her desk, running his fingers over the smooth wood where she had written letters, planned charity events, lived her life. On an impulse, he opened the drawer where she had kept her personal papers. Most had been moved to storage years ago, but a few items remained. A birthday card he'd given her, a pressed flower from their honeymoon, a small leather notebook he didn't recognize. Richard opened the notebook carefully. Inside, in Elizabeth's neat handwriting, were pages of notes about neural development, chemical formulas, experimental protocols, names and phone numbers many crossed out. On the final page, a single line, if all else fails, find Sarah Lynn. Sarah Lynn. The name meant nothing to him, but Elizabeth had thought this person important enough to include in her final notes. Richard reached for his phone, texting Harris. Need to find someone named Sarah Lynn, connected to neurology, possibly worked with Elizabeth. Urgent. Tomorrow would bring the court hearing, the beginning of Jason's treatment, the fight for Emily's future. But tonight, Richard had found one more breadcrumb on the trail Elizabeth had left. One more piece of the puzzle. He fell asleep in Elizabeth's chair, the notebook clutched to his chest, dreaming of his wife's voice guiding him through a maze of hidden truths. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Carter sat on one side, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, surrounded by lawyers. He was handsome in a cold way, with silver temples and piercing blue eyes that occasionally flicked toward Emily with unmistakable ownership. Richard sat on the opposite side with Marta Emily and Patricia Morgan. Jason had begun his first treatment session with Dr. Chen, protected by hospital security and 2 police officers. Judge Margaret Winters, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for protecting children's interests above all else, studied the documents before her. This is a most unusual case, she began. Dr. Carter, you claim paternal rights to the minor Emily Carter despite having no contact with her for 7 years. You further claim she is part of an ongoing research program with national security implications. Is that correct? Carter's lead attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client's research was sanctioned under classified protocols. The child's mother illegally removed her from the program with the assistance of Elizabeth Bennett, who had no authority to intervene. Judge Winters turned to Marta. Ms. Diaz, you claim Dr. Carter performed unauthorized genetic modifications on your daughter as an embryo constituting abuse and endangerment. Is that correct? Marta nodded, her voice steady despite her fear. Yes, Your Honor. He altered her without my knowledge or consent. When I discovered what he had done, I fled to protect her from further experimentation." The judge turned to Richard. "And Mr. Bennett, you are petitioning for temporary guardianship of Emily Diaz while these matters are resolved." "Yes, Your Honor. Emily and my son Jason have formed a close bond. Jason has just begun intensive medical treatment, and Emily's presence is vital to his emotional well-being. Additionally, I made a promise to my late wife to protect Emily and her mother, who have been part of our household for 7 years." Then Judge Winters considered this. "Dr. Carter, do you have documentation of this alleged research program?" Carter's attorney approached the bench. "These documents are classified, Your Honor, but have been cleared for your review only." The judge examined the papers for several long minutes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, she looked up. "These appear to be authentic government documents. However, they raise serious ethical concerns about experimentation on minors without proper oversight." She turned to Carter. "Did the child's mother provide informed consent for these procedures?" Carter himself stood now. "Your Honor, Marta signed consent forms for all procedures. She was a full participant in the research until Elizabeth Bennett convinced her to flee with my intellectual property." Marta gasped. "That's a lie. I never signed anything for genetic modification." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Winters banged her gavel. "Silence. This is precisely why this matter cannot be resolved today. I am ordering a full investigation into these claims. In the meantime—" The courtroom doors burst open. Detective Harris entered, accompanied by a small Asian woman in her 60s. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption," Harris called out, "but Dr. Sarah Lynn has critical evidence pertinent to this case." The judge frowned. "Detective Harris, this is highly irregular." "I understand, Your Honor, but Dr. Lynn worked with Elizabeth Bennett on documenting Dr. Carter's illegal experiments. She has evidence that the consent forms were forged and that the so-called research program was discontinued 3 years before Emily was conceived." Carter's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. Lynn was discredited years ago. Her testimony is worthless." Dr. Lynn stepped forward, her voice soft but steel strong. "I have the original research protocols, Judge Winters, and proof they were officially terminated before Emily's conception. James continued experimenting without authorization, without ethical oversight, and without valid consent." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Winters studied Dr. Lynn for a long moment, then nodded. "I will review this new evidence in chambers. In the meantime, I am granting temporary guardianship of Emily Diaz to Richard Bennett with the stipulation that Marta Diaz continues to reside in the household as Emily's primary caregiver." Carter leapt to his feet. "You can't do this. She's my daughter. My creation." "One more outburst like that, Dr. Carter, and I'll hold you in contempt," Judge Winters warned. "Your words just now calling a child your creation give me serious concerns about your fitness as a parent." As the courtroom emptied, Richard approached Dr. Lynn with Harris. "Thank you," Richard said simply. "Elizabeth mentioned you in her notes. You knew her." Dr. Lynn nodded, her eyes sad. "Elizabeth was my student, then my colleague. When she discovered what Carter was doing, she came to me for help. We documented everything, built a case against him, but his connections protected him from prosecution. And when Elizabeth died, I went into hiding. Carter threatened me, said I would be next. But when Detective Harris found me and told me about Jason, about Emily," she shook her head, "I couldn't stay silent anymore." "Dr. Lynn has been reviewing Dr. Chen's treatment plan for Jason," Harris added. "She has suggestions." Dr. Lynn's expression grew serious. "Dr. Chen's approach is sound but incomplete. Elizabeth and I were developing a counteragent to the drugs Mitchell used, a way to accelerate neural reconnection. I continued our work after her death in secret. Hope, that dangerous emotion Richard had been trying to temper, flared again. You have a treatment that could help Jason. Not a miracle cure," Dr. Lynn cautioned, "but something that might improve his odds from 15% to perhaps 50. 50%, the flip of a coin. So much better than what they had before." "Whatever it costs, whatever you need, just tell me," Richard said. Dr. Lynn smiled sadly. "I don't want money, Mr. Bennett. I want justice for Elizabeth and protection from Carter. He knows I'm here now. He'll come after me." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. You're under my protection now. We all are. As they left the courthouse, Richard noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Vanessa sat behind the wheel, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. Their gazes locked for a moment before she drove away. The battle was far from over. That evening, Richard stood in the doorway of Jason's hospital room, watching as Dr. Chen and Dr. Lin explained the modified treatment plan to his son. Emily sat beside the bed, holding Jason's hand as she had throughout the first grueling session. The electrical stimulation will feel like pins and needles at first, Dr. Lin was saying gently. Then it will burn, but each time your brain will remember a little more about how to talk to your legs. Jason nodded bravely. Will it hurt as much as today? Dr. Lin didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, maybe more. But Emily will be with you, and your father. And each day, it will get a little easier as pathways start to form. How long until I might walk? If this works, 6 to 9 months before your first steps. A year before you could walk across a room. Jason absorbed this. That's a long time. It is, Dr. Chen agreed. But you've waited 8 years already. What's one more? After the doctors left, Richard sat beside his son. How are you feeling, really? Jason was quiet for a moment. Scared, but also excited. Like maybe there's a chance now. He looked at Emily. She says I'm going to walk, that she can see it. Richard glanced at Emily, who blushed. Sometimes I just know things, she said softly. I can't explain how. Richard remembered Carter's words about Emily's enhancements, enhanced spatial cognition, heightened intuition, the ability to perceive patterns invisible to normal humans. Emily, Richard said carefully, when you found the locket in the garden, how did you know where to look? Emily twisted her fingers together nervously. I felt it calling me, like a buzzing in my head. It wanted to be found. And is there anything else at the house that calls to you? Anything hidden that wants to be found? Emily nodded slowly. In Miss Vanessa's office at your company, there's something there. Something important. It feels like the locket did. Richard exchanged a glance with Marta, who had entered quietly. Vanessa's office has been searched already, Richard said. The police found nothing. It's not in her office, Emily said. It's under it, in the floor. That's why they didn't find it. The implications were staggering. If Emily was right, if Vanessa had hidden evidence beneath her office floor, it could be the smoking gun they needed. Richard's phone rang. Harris again. Rich, we've got a problem. Mitchell's dead. Richard stepped into the hallway, lowering his voice. What? How? Apparent suicide in his cell. But the timing is suspicious. He was scheduled to give his full deposition tomorrow. Vanessa, Richard hissed. She silenced him. We can't prove that yet, but it gets worse. Without Mitchell's testimony, the case against her is weakening. We need that additional evidence you mentioned. Richard glanced back at Emily. We might have a lead. Emily says there's something hidden under the floor in Vanessa's office, something important. Harris was silent for a moment. Are we really going on the word of a 7-year-old? This 7-year-old found a locket buried in my garden that led us to uncover an 8-year conspiracy. So yes, we are. All right, I'll get a warrant. But Rich, be careful. Vanessa's dangerous, and now she's desperate. Richard ended the call and returned to Jason's room. The boy had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's treatment. Emily still sat beside him, vigilant as a tiny guardian angel. Emily, Richard said softly, we need to talk about what's in Vanessa's office. But first I need to know something. Are you afraid of your father? Of Dr. Carter? Emily's expression darkened. He's not my father. Not really. Fathers love you. They don't hurt you to make you better. She looked down at her small hands. He used to tell me I was his greatest creation, that I would change the world. But I don't want to change the world. I just want to be Emily. The simple honesty of her words struck Richard to his core. Carter had created a child with extraordinary abilities, but he'd failed to see the ordinary human needs every child has. for safety, for love, for acceptance. You are Emily, Richard assured her, and no one will ever make you be anything else. Emily smiled, a weight visibly lifting from her small shoulders. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. You know, Richard said gently, since you're staying with us for a while, you could call me Richard instead of Mr. Bennett, if you wanted to. Emily's green eyes studied him solemnly. Jason calls you Dad. Well, yes, I'm his father. My father doesn't want to be my father. He wants to be my creator. Emily pronounced the word with distaste. But you want to be Jason's father. You take care of him. You love him. Richard nodded, uncertain where this was going. Could you? Emily hesitated, then lifted her chin with sudden determination. Could you be like a father to me too? Not forever. Just until we make Jason walk and catch the bad people. The request, so tentative and yet so profound, caught Richard completely off guard. This extraordinary child who had suffered so much was asking not for protection from her abilities or from those who would exploit them, but simply for what every child deserves. A father. I would be honored, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. But what would you call me? Emily considered this seriously. I could call you Richard Dad, so we all know it's temporary. The compromise was so earnest, so perfectly childlike in its logic, that Richard couldn't help but smile. Richard, Dad it is then. As Emily beamed at him, Richard felt something shift within his heart. The hole Elizabeth's death had left would never fully heal, but somehow these two children, one his by blood, one his by choice, were helping him build something new from the ruins of what was lost. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. The search of Vanessa's office, Jason's continued treatments, the ongoing legal battle with Carter. But tonight in this quiet hospital room, Richard Bennett had found a momentary peace, a peace he knew wouldn't last. In the parking garage below the hospital, Vanessa Palmer sat in her car watching the entrance through binoculars. Beside her, a burner phone rang. Is it done? Carter's voice demanded without greeting. Mitchell's taken care of, Vanessa confirmed. But we have a new problem. Sarah Lynn has resurfaced. Carter cursed. That interfering old woman. She should have stayed hidden. She's staying at Bennett's mansion, heavily guarded, and Judge Winters granted him temporary guardianship of Emily. This is Elizabeth's doing, Carter snarled. Even from the grave, she's still meddling in my work. Vanessa's grip tightened on the phone. I took care of Elizabeth. I can take care of Lynn too. No more bodies, Carter ordered. Too suspicious. We need Bennett to discredit himself, to show the world he's unstable, unfit to care for any child. And how do we do that? We take the one thing he can't lose, not again. Carter's voice turned calculating. His son. Vanessa smiled coldly into the darkness. When? Tomorrow, during the boy's treatment. Bennett will be distracted with the search of your office. And what about Emily? She's the real prize. Once we have Jason Bennett, we'll trade Emily for his son's safe return. He's sentimental that way. Carter paused, just like his wife was. As Vanessa ended the call, she opened her purse, checking the syringe nestled inside. The clear liquid would paralyze in seconds, rendering Jason unable to call for help, but fully conscious. The perfect bait. Tomorrow, Richard Bennett would learn the cost of opposing people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Tôi sẽ viết lại phần pha của câu chuyện về độ dài 7 年 từ khắc phục các vấn đề đã nêu trong đánh giá và giữ nguyên câu chuyện trên. Dawn broke over Boston with an ominous red sky. Richard Bennett stood at the window of his study, watching the security team patrol the grounds of his estate. In just 24 hours, the world had transformed around him. Enemies identified, alliances formed, battle lines drawn. His phone vibrated with a message from Detective Harris. Warrant secured. Meeting you at Bennett Tech in 1 hour. Bringing forensic team. This was it. If Emily was right, if there truly was something hidden beneath the floor of Vanessa's office, they might finally have the evidence needed to put her away for good, to get justice for Elizabeth and Jason. Richard made his way to the kitchen where Marta was preparing breakfast. The house felt emptier without the children, Jason still at the hospital for his treatments, Emily having insisted on staying with him. You're not eating, Marta observed, placing a cup of coffee before him. I can't, Not until we find what Vanessa hid. Marta sat across from him, her eyes troubled. What if there's nothing there? What if Emily is wrong? Richard shook his head. She won't be wrong. Not about this. And if you find it, if you get the evidence you need against Vanessa, then we focus everything on Jason's recovery, on keeping Emily safe from Carter. Marta studied him, her expression unreadable. It won't bring Elizabeth back. None of this will. The simple truth of her words struck Richard like a physical blow. I know, he admitted, but maybe it gives meaning to what happened to her. Maybe it helps her save our son, even from beyond the grave. Marta reached across the table, surprising him by taking his hand. Elizabeth would be proud of you, of the father you've become to Jason, of how you're protecting Emily. Richard squeezed her hand, drawing strength from this woman who had endured so much herself. We protect each other now, all of us. An hour later, Richard stood in the executive floor of Bennett Technologies headquarters, watching as forensic technicians examined Vanessa's office. Detective Harris directed the team with grim efficiency, having sealed off the entire floor to prevent interference. Outside news vans had already gathered, alerted by police scanners to the search warrant being executed at the prestigious tech company. The press is all over this, Harris muttered, glancing out the window. Financial crimes, child endangerment, murder conspiracy involving a billionaire CEO, they're having a field day. Let them, Richard said grimly. When the truth comes out, let the whole world know what she did. Where exactly does Emily think this evidence is hidden? Harris asked, keeping his voice low. Richard pointed to the corner of the room. She said under the northeast corner, behind Vanessa's desk. Harris nodded to the lead technician, who began carefully removing the plush carpet. The room fell silent as he worked, everyone watching intently. When the carpet was pulled back, there was nothing but smooth concrete. There's nothing here, Rich, Harris said gently. Richard's heart sank. Had Emily been wrong? Had they misunderstood her? Wait, the technician called out, running his hand over the concrete. This section is different. The color doesn't quite match. He knocked on the surface, listening intently. It's hollow underneath. New energy surged through the room. The technician retrieved a specialized drill and began carefully boring into the suspicious section. The drill bit broke through after an inch, revealing a space below. There's a hidden compartment, he announced, widening the hole. Hand me the fiber optic camera. He threaded the slender camera into the space, watching the monitor as images appeared. It's some kind of lockbox. Metal. Looks waterproof, fireproof. Harris turned to Richard. Emily was right. There's something there. It took another 30 minutes to cut through the concrete and extract the box. It was small, about the size of a large dictionary made of brushed steel with a digital lock. We'll need to get this to the lab, Harris began. No, Richard interrupted, examining the lock. I know this model. It's one of ours. Bennett Technologies manufactures these for high-security applications. He turned the box, finding the company logo discreetly etched on the bottom. These are programmed with a 6-digit code, usually something personally significant to the owner. Any idea what Vanessa might have used? Richard thought for a moment, then entered a sequence 022388. The date he'd founded Bennett Technologies. The lock remained red. He tried again, 11259. The date he'd hired Vanessa. Still nothing. What else would be significant to her? Harris mused. A cold realization swept over Richard. Elizabeth's death date. He entered 051715. The lock turned green with a soft click. Harris let out a low whistle. She used your wife's death date as her security code. That's sick. Richard finished, anger pulsing through him as he opened the box. Inside were precisely organized files and a portable hard drive. The top folder was labeled simply EB Project. Richard's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were photographs of Elizabeth throughout her pregnancy, clearly taken without her knowledge. Medical charts, drug dosage schedules, handwritten notes in Vanessa's precise script detailing Elizabeth's deteriorating condition. My God, Harris breathed, looking over Richard's shoulder. She documented everything, like some kind of trophy collection. The next folder was labeled JB Maintenance. Inside were 8 years of records, the drugs given to Jason, observations of his development notes on his paralysis progression. Vanessa had tracked it all with clinical detachment, like a scientist monitoring an experiment. "This is enough to bury her," Harris said, already signaling to the evidence technicians. "Multiple counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, child endangerment. She'll never see the outside of a prison." Richard continued examining the contents of the box, his stomach turning with each new revelation. At the bottom was a small notebook with a different label, Phase 2. He opened it with growing dread. The first page contained a detailed plan for what Vanessa called the final solution, a scheme to increase Jason's drug dosage to lethal levels over the next 3 months, making it appear as a natural progression of his condition. Notes on how to console the grieving father. Plans for how she would finally become Mrs. Richard Bennett once a suitable mourning period had passed. "She was going to kill him," Richard said, voice breaking. "She was going to murder my son." Harris took the notebook carefully. "And she won't get the chance now. This is premeditation, Rich. First-degree murder charges for the attempt alone." Richard's phone rang the hospital. His heart jumped to his throat as he answered. "Mr. Bennett, this is Nurse Caldwell from Boston Children's. We have a situation with Jason. He's missing." The world tilted beneath Richard's feet. "Missing? What do you mean missing? He can't walk. He can't just disappear." Security cameras show a woman matching Vanessa Palmer's description entering his room disguised as a nurse. Dr. Chen found his bed empty 15 minutes ago. Emily is hysterical, saying the bad lady took him. Richard could barely breathe. When did this happen?" "Approximately 45 minutes ago, sir. We've already alerted hospital security and the police." Richard ended the call, turning to Harris with wild eyes. "Vanessa has Jason. She took him from the hospital while we were here." "But how would she know we were searching her office?" Harris asked, already on his radio, calling for backup and an APB on Vanessa Palmer. The cleaning staff, a forensic tech, spoke up. "When we arrived, there was a woman finishing the morning cleaning. Said she was on the night shift. She left right after we came in." Richard cursed. That was her spy. She must have been monitoring the office, waiting to see if we'd find her hiding place. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "A son for a daughter. Fair trade. Instructions to follow. Tell no one, or the boy dies." He showed it to Harris, who immediately began tracing procedures, but Richard knew it would be futile. Vanessa was too smart to use a traceable phone. "It's Carter," Richard said with sudden certainty. "They're working together now. He wants Emily. She wants revenge. We'll find them, Rich. Every officer in Boston will be looking." But Richard knew the odds. Knew that with each passing minute, Jason was being taken farther away, deeper into danger. His son, who couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't fight back. His phone buzzed again. Proof of life. Attached was a photo of Jason, terrified but alive, strapped into a car seat. A woman's hand was visible at the edge of the frame, holding a syringe near his neck. "I have to go to the hospital," Richard said. "Emily might know something. She might sense where they've taken him." "That's exactly what they want," Harris warned. "To separate you from your security, get you somewhere they can take Emily too." "Then what do I do?" Richard's voice cracked with desperation. "They have my son." Harris squeezed his shoulder. "We play their game for now. But we do it smart. I'll get Emily from the hospital and bring her to a secure location. Not your house, not a police station somewhere they won't expect. Then we wait for their instructions and set a trap." It was the logical plan, the tactically sound approach, but it did nothing to ease the cold terror gripping Richard's heart. Another text arrived. 1 hour. Come alone to the old Bennett Technologies research facility. Bring Emily or watch your son die. The abandoned research facility. Of course, it had been Bennett Technologies' first headquarters, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Boston that Richard hadn't visited in years. Remote, isolated, with multiple escape routes. The perfect location for an exchange or an ambush. Richard showed Harris the message. The detective immediately began organizing teams, plotting approach vectors, preparing for every contingency. "We'll need Emily to cooperate," Harris said, "to appear to go along with this while actually being protected at all times." Richard shook his head. "I won't put her in danger. She's just a child. And Jason is just a child too." Harris reminded him gently. Sometimes there are no good choices, only less terrible ones. Richard knew he was right. Knew that this impossible choice, risking Emily to save Jason, was exactly what Carter and Vanessa had engineered. A sadistic test with no correct answer. At the hospital, they found Emily sitting with Dr. Chen and Dr. Lin, her small face streaked with tears, but her eyes burning with determination. "Richard, Dad," she said, running to him as he entered. "The bad lady took Jason. I tried to stop her, but she had a needle and she said she'd hurt him if I screamed." Richard knelt, embracing her tightly. "It's not your fault, Emily. None of this is your fault." "I know where they took him," Emily said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "I can feel him, like I felt the locket." Harris exchanged glances with Richard. "Emily, where do you think Jason is?" "The cold place, where the metal tables are, where my father used to work." Richard frowned. "The research facility. How would you know about that?" Emily's eyes were distant. "I see it in my dreams sometimes, the place where he made me different. And Jason is there now. I can feel him being scared." Dr. Lin stepped forward. "Emily's enhancements likely include a form of psychic connection to people she's emotionally bonded with. Carter was attempting to create human connections that transcended physical limitations." "Can we trust it?" Harris asked bluntly. "Or could this be Carter somehow manipulating her perceptions?" "I'm not sure," Dr. Lin admitted. "But I've studied Carter's work extensively. His focus was always on genuine enhancements, not implanting false perceptions." Richard made his decision. "We trust Emily, but she stays safe, absolutely safe. I'll go to the exchange point alone as instructed. Your teams will be in position but invisible." "And what about me?" Emily asked, her small voice strong despite her fear. "I want to help save Jason." Richard knelt again, meeting her eyes. "You've already helped more than anyone could ask, Emily. You found the truth about what happened to Elizabeth. You found the evidence against Vanessa. Now I need you to stay safe while we bring Jason home." Emily's expression turned stubborn. "But I can find him better than anyone. I can feel where he is in the building. The machines can't do that." Dr. Lin intervened. "Emily is right. Her ability to sense Jason's location could be invaluable, but she doesn't need to be physically present at the exchange." "What do you mean?" Richard asked. "We can set up a remote communication system. Emily stays in a secure location, guiding you through a transmitter. She tells you where Jason is, you relay that information to the tactical teams." It was a compromise. Not perfect, but better than the alternatives. "Okay," Richard agreed. "But at the first sign of danger, Emily is evacuated. No exceptions." The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Richard was fitted with a nearly invisible earpiece connected to a secure channel. Tactical teams were deployed to surround the abandoned research facility. Emily was taken to a mobile command center 2 miles away, where she would direct operations with Dr. Lin's supervision. Outside the hospital, journalists had gathered in force. The story was breaking across all major networks: tech billionaire's son kidnapped, family doctor and secretary implicated in years-long conspiracy. Richard ignored the shouted questions and camera flashes as he was escorted to an unmarked police car. Let them report the story. Let the world know what monsters had done to his family. As Richard prepared to leave for the exchange point, his phone rang once more. Unknown number. "Bennett? Mr. Bennett?" James Carter's smooth voice filled the line. "I assume you've received our invitation. Where is my son?" "Safe for now. Awaiting the return of my daughter." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. "Emily isn't your daughter. She stopped being that the moment you treated her like an experiment instead of a child." Carter chuckled. Such moral outrage from a man who built his fortune on neural interfaces that blur the line between human and machine. "We're not so different, you and I." "I've never experimented on children," Richard snapped. "No, you just failed to notice while your wife was being murdered and your son was being poisoned. For 8 years. Carter's voice turned icy. "Your moral high ground is built on negligence, Bennett. At least I pay attention to my creations." The barb struck home, piercing the armor of Richard's righteous anger. He had failed to notice, had been too consumed with his company, his legacy, to see what was happening right under his nose. Just tell me what you want, Richard said finally. Simple. Bring Emily to the north entrance of the facility. Come alone. Once I've confirmed she's unharmed and unaltered, I'll release your son. Everyone gets what they truly want. And Vanessa? What does she get out of this? A pause. Miss Palmer has her own arrangements. They need not concern you. The line went dead. 30 minutes later, Richard stood before the abandoned research facility, its concrete facade grim against the darkening sky. Storm clouds gathered overhead, a fitting backdrop for the confrontation to come. "Emily, can you hear me?" he murmured, testing the earpiece. "Yes, Richard. Dad." Her voice was clear, determined. "Jason is on the second floor in the big room with all the glass walls. My father's old laboratory." Richard relayed this to Harris through a separate channel. The detective confirmed that tactical teams were in position, invisible but ready. "Vanessa is with him," Emily continued, "and someone else, someone angry, cold inside." "Carter," Richard said grimly. "Be careful," Emily warned. "The cold man has something with him, something that hurts." Richard approached the north entrance as instructed, pushing open the heavy door. The interior was dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows across dusty equipment and abandoned workstations. "Bennett," Carter's voice echoed from a speaker system. "Where is my daughter?" "Safe," Richard called back. "Where you can't experiment on her anymore." A harsh laugh reverberated through the space. "Still playing the hero cameras show you came alone. Where is she?" "First show me Jason, proof that he's alive and unharmed." A monitor on the wall flickered to life, showing a live feed of Jason strapped to what looked like a hospital bed. Vanessa stood beside him, one hand resting almost tenderly on his shoulder, the other holding a syringe. "Dad," Jason called out, his voice thin with fear but alive. "Don't give them Emily. Don't do it." Richard's heart twisted at his son's courage. "I'm coming for you, Jason." "Just hold on." The monitor went dark. "Satisfied?" Carter's voice returned. "Now where is Emily?" "Second floor, take the east stairwell," Emily whispered in Richard's ear. "Jason is being moved. They're separating." Richard relayed the information to Harris, then addressed Carter again. "Emily isn't coming, but I am. And so are the police. It's over, Carter. We found Vanessa's records. We know everything." A long silence followed, then, "Always the businessman. Even now you think you can negotiate. Very well, let's talk face to face." Richard followed Emily's directions, taking the east stairwell to the second floor. The corridor was lined with abandoned laboratories, their glass walls covered in dust. "Third door on the right," Emily guided. "He's waiting for you. But Richard, Dad, he has a gun." Richard paused, touching his earpiece. "Harris, are you getting this?" "Affirmative," came the detective's tense reply. "Teams are in position. At your signal, we move in." Richard took a deep breath and pushed open the third door. The laboratory was large, once state-of-the-art, now a ghostly shell of abandoned equipment. Carter stood at the center, impeccably dressed as always, one hand casually in his pocket. He looked more like a CEO at a board meeting than a man engaged in kidnapping. "Bennett, at last we meet properly." Carter's smile was cold, his eyes calculating. "I've admired your work for years. Your neural interface technology is revolutionary." "Where is my son?" Richard demanded. Carter gestured vaguely. "Nearby, with Miss Palmer. She has personal matters to discuss with him. If she harms one hair on his head..." "Please," Carter cut him off dismissively. "We're not barbarians. The boy is valuable, unlike his mother who outlived her usefulness." Richard's control nearly snapped. "You knew about Elizabeth." "Of course I knew. Vanessa and I have been associates for years. She financed my early research when your wife got me blacklisted from legitimate funding sources. In return, I helped her address her Elizabeth problem." "You're a monster." Carter shrugged. "I'm a visionary, like you once were before you became so conventional." He withdrew his hand from his pocket, revealing not a gun but a small remote control. "Now shall we discuss terms for your son's return?" "There are no terms," Richard said flatly. "You're surrounded by police. It's over." Second floor west corridor. Emily's voice suddenly came urgently through the earpiece. Jason is there alone. Vanessa is coming toward you. She knows it's a trap. Richard relayed the information to Harris immediately, who confirmed teams were converging on Jason's location. Carter's expression darkened as he realized something was wrong. You're wearing a transmitter. Who are you communicating with? His finger hovered over the remote. Tell me, or I trigger the failsafe. The boy dies instantly. Emily, Richard admitted. She can sense Jason. She's been guiding the police to him. Something like pride flickered across Carter's face. Extraordinary. Her abilities have developed even further than I anticipated. He stepped closer. You see now why she's so valuable, what she represents for the future of human evolution. She represents a child you abused, Richard countered. Nothing more. Carter's facade of civility cracked. You understand nothing. Emily is the culmination of decades of research, the perfect synthesis of genetic engineering and cognitive enhancement. She could change everything: disease prevention, neural degeneration, human potential itself. And yet, with all your genius, you fail to understand the most basic truth. She's a little girl who needs love, not a test subject who needs monitoring. Carter's expression twisted with rage. He raised the remote. Enough. Tell me where my daughter is, or... A gunshot echoed through the laboratory. Carter staggered backward, the remote falling from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. Behind him, Vanessa stood in the doorway, a pistol trained unwaveringly on his back. Vanessa! Richard stared in confusion. He was going to kill Jason anyway, she said coldly. Once he had Emily, he didn't need your son as leverage anymore. But I still need Jason. For what? Richard asked, watching as Carter collapsed to his knees, blood seeping between his fingers. For you, Vanessa said simply. All of this, Elizabeth, the paralysis, everything it was, so you would need me, depend on me, eventually love me. Carter promised me that if I helped with his research, he'd ensure the boy would recover enough to walk someday, just enough to keep you grateful, but never enough to be independent. You're insane, Richard whispered. No, I'm patient. 15 years, Richard. 15 years watching you look through me like I wasn't even there. Elizabeth saw me, immediately saw the threat. But you never noticed how I felt, how I built your company while you took all the credit. So you murdered my wife, poisoned my son, because I didn't give you enough recognition. Vanessa's laugh was brittle. Recognition? I didn't want recognition. I wanted you. Everything I did for us. Where is Jason now? Richard demanded. Safe, for the moment. Vanessa gestured with the gun. And he'll stay that way as long as you make the right choice now. What choice? Come with me. Just you and me away from here. Start over somewhere new. I've arranged everything: new identities, accounts in Switzerland, a beautiful home in the Alps where Jason can continue his treatments. The magnitude of her delusion was staggering. You think I would go anywhere with you after what you did to my family? I am your family. Vanessa shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. I've been by your side longer than Elizabeth ever was. I know you better than she ever did. Behind Vanessa, Richard caught a glimpse of movement in the corridor. Police tactical teams were in position, waiting for his signal. Tell me where Jason is, Richard said, playing for time. Then we can discuss arrangements. Vanessa's eyes narrowed with suspicion. No. First you agree to come with me. Then I take you to Jason. He needs medical attention, Richard pressed. The treatment protocol's the neural stimulation. He can't miss a day, or it sets back his progress. I've made provisions, Vanessa insisted. Carter has associates in Europe, specialists who can continue his treatment. On the floor, Carter laughed weakly through his pain. You fool! I never intended to help the boy walk. Once I had Emily back, I planned to eliminate all witnesses, including you. Vanessa whirled on him, her gun hand shaking. You lying bastard! We had a deal. The deal was to help you get Bennett, Carter spat. Nothing more. The boy is irrelevant. Damaged goods. It was the opening Richard needed. As Vanessa's attention shifted to Carter, he gave the signal through his transmitter. The tactical team burst through the door, weapons trained on Vanessa. Drop the weapon, the lead officer commanded. For a moment it seemed Vanessa might comply. Then her face contorted with rage and she swung the gun toward Richard. "If I can't have you, no one—" 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Vanessa crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across her immaculate suit. Richard was already running, following Emily's directions through his earpiece. "West corridor, 3rd door on the left. Hurry, Richard, Dad. He's scared, but okay." He found Jason exactly where Emily said he would be, strapped to a hospital gurney, but blessedly unharmed. The boy's face crumpled with relief at the sight of his father. "Dad, you came." Richard released the restraints with shaking hands, gathering his son into his arms. "Of course I came. I will always come for you, Jason. Always." Jason clung to him, trembling. "She said you weren't coming, that you chose Emily instead." "Never," Richard whispered fiercely. "I would never choose anyone over you. But I also wouldn't abandon Emily. We protect each other now. All of us." Detective Harris appeared in the doorway. "Paramedics are on their way. Carter's in custody. He'll live to stand trial. Vanessa didn't make it." Richard nodded, still holding Jason close. "Emily." "Safe." Asking about Jason. "That kid, she really did lead us right to him, like she could see through the walls." Richard thought of Carter's words about Emily's abilities, about human potential. Perhaps there was something valuable in his research, something that could be ethically explored to help others. But never at the cost of a child's well-being. Never again. "Let's go home," he told Jason. "Emily's waiting." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of media coverage, legal proceedings, and most importantly, continued treatment for Jason. The story had captured national attention. Tech CEO's wife, murdered son, poisoned for years. Secretary's obsession, unethical genetic experiments. It read like a thriller novel rather than real life. Richard had been forced to hire a public relations team just to manage the press inquiries. Fortunately, public sympathy was overwhelmingly on his side. The attempted kidnapping of Jason had been the final straw. Even the most cynical commentators couldn't find a way to blame the victim. Carter's trial was fast-tracked due to the high-profile nature of the case and the overwhelming evidence. He had pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, claiming his scientific genius had been misunderstood. The court-appointed psychiatrists disagreed, finding him competent to stand trial. Most importantly, Jason's treatments continued. Dr. Chen and Dr. Lin worked tirelessly, adjusting protocols, monitoring his progress, celebrating each small victory. 3 months after the confrontation at the research facility, Richard sat in Dr. Chen's office reviewing the latest test results. "His progress is remarkable," Dr. Chen said, pointing to a series of brain scans. "The neural pathways are regenerating at a rate I've never seen before in a case like this. It's as if his brain was just waiting for the chance to form these connections." "When might he take his first steps?" Richard asked, hardly daring to hope. Dr. Lin smiled gently. "We should be realistic. With the extent of the damage and the duration, it will still be a long journey. I'd estimate another 9 to 12 months before we attempt supported standing, and perhaps 18 months before actual steps." "But it will happen," Richard pressed, "based on his current rate of progress." Dr. Chen nodded. "Yes, I believe it will happen. He won't be running marathons, but walking across a room. Yes, that's a realistic goal now." As Richard left the office, he found Emily waiting in the corridor, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Is Jason going to walk?" she asked immediately, her remarkable intuition as sharp as ever. Richard knelt to her level. "The doctors think so, yes. It's going to take a long time, though." Emily nodded solemnly. "I know. But he will. I can see the lights getting stronger every day." In the months since the kidnapping, Emily's abilities had become better understood. Dr. Lin had conducted careful ethical assessments, always with Marta's informed consent and Emily's enthusiastic participation. The child could indeed perceive neural activity as lights, a form of synesthesia that allowed her to visualize biological electrical impulses. She had an extraordinary spatial memory and intuition that bordered on precognition. The most remarkable ability, however, was her capacity to form deep empathic bonds with those she cared about. Her connection to Jason was so profound that she often sensed his emotions and physical state before he expressed them. You know what else I can see? Emily said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What's that? Richard asked. Jason's going to do something special today. Something he's been practicing when you're not looking. Richard raised an eyebrow. Is that right? And what might that be? Emily grinned. You'll see. It's a surprise. They entered Jason's therapy room together. The boy was seated in a specialized chair, electrodes attached to his legs, as Dr. Lin monitored the computer readings. When he saw Richard and Emily, his face lit up with determination. Dad, watch this. Before Richard could respond, Jason gripped the armrests of his chair and with visible effort lifted his right foot an inch off the ground. It hovered there for 3 seconds before dropping back down. Did you see? Jason's face was flushed with triumph. I did it. I lifted my foot. Richard felt tears spring to his eyes. It was such a small movement, something most people would take completely for granted, but for Jason it represented a monumental achievement, the first voluntary movement of his leg in 8 years. That was amazing, buddy, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. Absolutely amazing. Emily's been helping me practice, Jason admitted. She can tell me when I'm doing it right when the lights are connecting. Richard glanced at Emily, who was beaming with pride. These two children, bound together by circumstance and now by choice, had formed a bond unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. The courthouse was packed 6 months later for Carter's sentencing. The trial had been swift and decisive, the evidence overwhelming. Illegal human experimentation, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, fraud. The list of charges had been extensive. Richard sat in the front row with Marta beside him. The children had remained at home with security, no need for them to relive the trauma in such a public setting. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had presided over the case with unwavering fairness, addressed the courtroom. Dr. James Carter, you have been found guilty on all counts. The jury was not swayed by your claims of scientific necessity, nor should they have been. Science without ethics is not advancement. It is barbarism with a veneer of sophistication. She paused, looking directly at Carter, who stood impassively in his prison jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the impeccably tailored suits he'd worn during the trial. You experimented on your own child without consent. You conspired in the murder of Elizabeth Bennett and the poisoning of her son. You kidnapped a disabled child. The court can find no mitigating factors in your case. Carter remained expressionless as the judge pronounced his sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole plus additional consecutive sentences for each count. As the court officers led Carter away, he turned briefly toward Richard, their eyes meeting across the courtroom. In that moment, Richard saw not a monster, but a hollow man, brilliant but fundamentally empty, incapable of understanding the true value of what he'd destroyed in pursuit of his vision. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions at Richard and Marta as they descended the steps. Mr. Bennett, how does it feel to see justice served? Is it true your son is showing signs of recovery? Ms. Diaz, will Emily continue to participate in research studies of her abilities? Richard held up a hand. My son is making remarkable progress thanks to dedicated medical professionals. Emily is a normal little girl who deserves privacy and a childhood free from scrutiny. The science that created her abilities was unethical, but we will continue to work with ethical researchers to understand how her unique gifts might someday help others, only if and when she chooses to participate. That's all I have to say today. Thank you. 9 months after the trial, Richard stood in the doorway of the therapy room at Boston Children's Hospital, watching as Jason struggled through his daily exercises. Dr. Chen and Dr. Lin supervised closely, making adjustments to the electrical stimulation levels, monitoring his neural responses. The treatment had been brutal every day, filled with pain, exhaustion, and slow incremental progress. But there had been progress. Unmistakable, miraculous progress. Again, Jason, Dr. Chen encouraged. Try to move your right foot forward. Jason's face contorted with effort, sweat beading on his forehead. For long seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly his right foot slid forward 1/2 inch. Excellent, Doctor, Lin exclaimed, making notes rapidly. The pathway is strengthening. The nerve conduction velocity has improved 30% since last month. Emily sat cross-legged on a mat nearby, watching intently. She had attended every session, refusing to leave Jason's side through the most difficult moments. Her presence seemed to give him strength beyond his own resources. "You can do it, Jason," she said confidently. "Your brain is remembering how to talk to your legs. I can see the lights getting brighter." "Dad," Jason called out, noticing Richard in the doorway. "Did you see I moved my foot?" Richard entered the room, his heart full. "I saw Buddy. That was amazing." "Dr. Chen says I might be ready for the parallel bars next month," Jason said excitedly. "I could try standing." "One step at a time," Dr. Chen cautioned with a smile. "But yes, if progress continues at this rate, we'll try supported standing within 4 to 6 weeks." It was more than they had dared hope for when the treatment began. The combination of Dr. Chen's protocol and Dr. Lin's counteragents had proven remarkably effective. Jason would likely never run marathons, but walking real independent walking now seemed within reach. After the session ended, Richard pushed Jason's wheelchair through the hospital garden, Emily skipping alongside them. Marta followed at a discreet distance, giving them space while remaining vigilant. The courts had granted Richard permanent guardianship of Emily, with Marta continuing as her primary caregiver within the Bennett household. They stopped by a small pond where ducks swam lazily in the afternoon sun. "I had that dream again last night," Jason said suddenly. "The one where Mom is talking to me." Richard glanced at his son. These dreams had started a few months ago. Vivid conversations with Elizabeth that Jason insisted were more than just dreams. "What did she say this time?" Richard asked gently. "She said she's proud of me for being brave, and proud of you for finding the truth." Jason hesitated. "And she said to take care of Emily because she's part of our family now." Richard looked at Emily, who was tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been when they first met. "Your mom was very wise," Richard said, "and I think she's right." "Dad," Jason's voice turned serious. "When I can walk, can we go to Mom's grave together? I want to tell her everything myself." Richard swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Absolutely. That's a promise." Emily returned to them, her breadcrumbs exhausted. "The ducks say thank you," she announced solemnly. "The ducks talk to you too?" Richard asked with a smile. Emily rolled her eyes dramatically. "No, silly Richard, Dad, but I can tell they're happy. Animals have colors around them just like people do." Another aspect of her enhanced perception that they were still discovering. Dr. Lin believed Emily might be sensing electromagnetic fields that surrounded all living things, auras, some might call them. "What color am I today?" Jason asked, as he often did. Emily studied him. "Blue and gold. Blue because you're tired from working so hard. Gold because you're getting stronger." "And Dad?" Emily turned her remarkable green eyes to Richard. "Green like forest trees, strong, with red all around the edges." "What does the red mean?" Richard asked curiously. "Love," Emily said simply. "It means the person has lots of love." Richard smiled, reaching out to touch her hair gently. "I think you're right about that, Emily." As they made their way back to the hospital for Jason's final treatment of the day, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, his world had been shattered by revelations of betrayal and murder, Elizabeth's death, Jason's paralysis, the conspiracy that had stolen 8 years from them. It had seemed an abyss of darkness from which they could never emerge. Yet here they were, Jason improving daily, Emily safe and flourishing, a new family formed from the ashes of tragedy. The truth had nearly destroyed them, but in the end, it had also set them free. 6 months later, news crews gathered outside Boston Children's Hospital, kept at a respectful distance by security personnel. Inside, in a private therapy room, a small group had assembled for a momentous occasion. Dr. Chen and Dr. Lin stood on either side of the parallel bars. Marta watched from a chair against the wall, tears already streaming down her face. Emily bounced excitedly beside her, unable to contain her anticipation. Richard stood at the far end of the bars, his heart pounding. Jason sat in his wheelchair at the near end, dressed in a new tracksuit he had selected especially for this day. After 15 months of grueling therapy, countless setbacks and breakthroughs, Countless tears and small victories. Today was the day they had all been waiting for, the day Jason would attempt to walk. "Remember," Dr. Chen said gently, "just focus on one step at a time. We're not trying to cross the whole distance today. Even one step is a victory." Jason nodded, his face a mask of determination. "I know, but I want to reach Dad." Richard swallowed hard. "I'm right here, buddy. No matter how many steps you take, I'm proud of you." With Dr. Lin's assistance, Jason rose from the wheelchair, gripping the parallel bars with white-knuckled intensity. His legs trembled with the effort of supporting his weight, but they held. He stood wobbly but upright for the first time in 9 years. Emily clapped her hands. "The lights are so bright now, like sunshine." Jason took a deep breath and lifted his right foot, moving it forward 6 inches before setting it down again. Then his left. Another right. Each step was a battle. Each inch forward, a triumph of will over damaged nerves and atrophied muscles. 5 steps. 6. 7. Sweat poured down Jason's face. His arms shook with the effort of supporting his weight on the bars, but he kept going. 8 steps. 9. 10. He was halfway to Richard now, having already gone farther than anyone had dared hope for this first attempt. Dr. Chen and Dr. Lin exchanged amazed glances. "Jason," Dr. Chen said carefully, "you've already accomplished more than enough for today. You can stop if you need to." Jason shook his head, not taking his eyes off his father. "Not yet. Almost there." 3 more agonizing steps. His legs began to buckle. Richard started to move forward to catch him, but Dr. Lin held up a hand. "Let him finish if he can." With one final Herculean effort, Jason took his 14th step, bringing him within arm's reach of Richard. As his knees gave out, Richard caught him, lifting him into a fierce embrace. "You did it," Richard whispered, tears flowing freely down his face. "You walked to me." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Emily danced in circles, shouting, I told you he would do it." Later that evening, after Jason had been settled into bed, exhausted but triumphant, Richard found Emily sitting on the window seat in the mansion's library, gazing out at the garden where this journey had begun. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting beside her. She shook her head. "Too excited. Jason walked today." "Yes, he did. Thanks in large part to you." Emily turned those remarkable green eyes toward him. "Richard, Dad, remember when I said I would call you that, just until Jason could walk, and we caught the bad people?" Richard felt a pang in his chest. "I remember." "Well, now Jason walked and the bad people are caught." She looked down at her hands. "But I was thinking, maybe I could still call you Dad. Without the Richard part, if that's okay." Richard's throat tightened with emotion. "Emily, nothing would make me happier. But what does your mom think about that?" "It was her idea," Emily said matter-of-factly. "She said families come in lots of different ways, and sometimes people find their family instead of being born into it." Richard glanced toward the doorway where Marta stood watching them, a soft smile on her face. She nodded once, confirming what Emily had said. "Then yes," Richard said, gathering Emily into a hug. "I would be honored to be your dad, for as long as you want." 2 weeks later, Richard stood beside Elizabeth's grave, autumn leaves swirling around his feet. Beside him, Jason stood upright, supported by forearm crutches, but standing on his own 2 feet. Emily and Marta waited a respectful distance away, allowing father and son this private moment. "I did it, Mom," Jason said to the headstone, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm standing, and the doctors think in a few more months I might be able to walk short distances without the crutches." Richard placed his hand on his son's shoulder, overwhelmed with pride and a bittersweet joy. Elizabeth should have been here to see this moment, should have been here for all the moments. "She knows," he told Jason softly. "Somehow I think she knows." Jason nodded, then looked up at his father. "I'm ready now. I want to try." Richard held his breath as Jason carefully positioned his crutches, then took a deliberate step forward, then another, and another. 6 painstaking steps that brought him directly before Elizabeth's headstone. "I walk to you, Mom," Jason whispered, reaching out to touch the cold marble. "Just like I promised I would." From her waiting place, Emily suddenly gasped, "Dad, Jason, look!" They turned to see what had startled her. A monarch butterfly had landed on Elizabeth's headstone, its orange wings opening and closing slowly in the autumn sunlight. "Mom's favorite," Jason breathed in wonder. The butterfly lingered for several heartbeats, then rose into the air, circling once around Jason before flying away toward the setting sun. Emily approached them, her expression solemn. "That was her," she said with absolute certainty. "That was Jason's mama saying hello." Richard didn't know if it was true, if Elizabeth's spirit had somehow manifested in that brief, beautiful moment, but he chose to believe it anyway. Chose to believe that somewhere, somehow, Elizabeth knew that her final fight had not been in vain, that the son she had died protecting was standing on his own 2 feet at last. As they made their way back to the car, Jason walking those few precious steps before fatigue overcame him, Richard found himself filled with an unfamiliar feeling, hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that had sustained him through the darkest days, but something brighter, stronger, more certain. The road ahead would still be difficult. Jason's recovery would continue to be measured in painful increments. Public interest in their story had begun to fade, but there were still occasional reporters hoping for updates or an exclusive. Emily's unique abilities would present challenges none of them could yet anticipate. But they would face it together, this unexpected family forged in fire and truth. And somewhere Richard believed Elizabeth was watching over them all. As they drove home, Jason fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's emotional and physical exertion. Emily looked out the window, occasionally pointing out animals only she could see the colors around. In the passenger seat, Marta turned to Richard. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Dr. Lynn offered me a position at her new research center. She wants me to help coordinate the ethics oversight for studies involving enhanced perception." Richard glanced at her. "That's wonderful. You'd be perfect for it." "I was worried about the timing with Jason's progress and Emily starting school." "We'll make it work," Richard assured her. "You deserve this opportunity." Marta studied his profile. "You've changed, you know. The Richard Bennett I met 7 years ago wouldn't have said that. He would have worried about how it affected his household first." Richard considered this. "I suppose losing everything that matters teaches you what actually matters." When they arrived home, Richard carried the sleeping Jason inside while Emily chatted animatedly with Marta about the monarch butterfly. As he tucked his son into bed, Jason stirred briefly. "Dad," he murmured sleepily. "I'm here, buddy. I was dreaming about Mom again. She said—" Jason yawned, drifting back toward sleep. "She said we were her legacy. Not the company, not the money. Us." Richard brushed the hair from his son's forehead. She was right. Downstairs, he found Marta preparing tea in the kitchen. "Emily's looking at the stars through her telescope," she said, handing him a cup. "She says they have colors too." Richard smiled. "Of course they do." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their tea. "I never properly thanked you," Richard said finally, "for bringing Emily into our lives, for staying even when it was dangerous." Marta set down her cup. "I never properly thanked you either, for believing us, for protecting my daughter when you barely knew us." "I think," Richard said softly, "that we were all part of Elizabeth's plan somehow. She knew what would happen. She made sure the right people would be here when Jason and I needed them most." Later that night, Richard stood at the window of his study looking out at the garden where a little girl had once dug in the mud and found a silver locket, the place where truth had been buried for 8 years waiting to be discovered. The truth had been hidden in darkness for so long, buried like that silver locket in the garden soil. But once unearthed by a child's innocent hands, it had set in motion a chain of events that had ultimately led to healing, to justice, to a new beginning. Some secrets are meant to be discovered no matter how deeply they are buried. Some truths demand to be known. And sometimes the most profound truths are the simplest ones of all, that love endures beyond death, that courage can overcome the darkest evil, and that family is not defined by blood alone, but by the hearts that choose to beat as one. Tomorrow, Jason would return to the hospital for his therapy. Emily would start her new advanced learning program. Marta would begin training for her position with Dr. Lynn. Life would move forward day by day, step by step. And Richard Bennett, who had once measured his worth in stock prices and market share, now found himself the richest man he knew, not in dollars, but in the treasures no money could buy. A son who had fought his way back from an impossible injury. A daughter whose extraordinary gifts went far beyond her enhanced perception. A household that had transformed from employees and employers to something far more precious, a family. The silver locket that had started it all now hung in a place of honor in the library, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, truth has a way of finding the light. And the truth, painful as it had been, had set them all free.